Hi everybody, Kyle Cordes here again with another Angular 2 live coding video. Again, I work at Oasis Digital where we build complex web-based systems, sometimes with Angular 2, sometimes with other tools, and I also teach and work on curriculum at Angular Bootcamp where we can teach you to work on those things. Okay, let's look at where we left off. To see where we were, remember that there's this repository that has an example server that streams data. The data looks like it's foreign currency exchange data, but it's actually mostly random. Then we have this repository of an Angular 2 program that you can use to show that data. As a reminder of how to run it, I've already done an npm install, and I never like to do an npm install on a live coding video because it is very slow, but I need to do an npm start with that streaming data server, and then the same thing, an npm start with the client application, which is using Angular CLI, and then that'll take just a moment to get up and running. Let me see if it's up yet here. I think I can hit refresh and it'll hold on until it's ready. So here we go. So as it runs, it continues to push more data. And so at the point we're at, we can see the most recent price for a number of currency pairs. Then we can see a history of them tick in. So as I look at this, the first thing that's annoying that I'll fix quickly is this thing is just showing me the number of seconds since 1970. Now, one interesting tidbit, in between the last video and this one, I found and fixed an irritating bug with that data in the example server. I won't go over that because it's a tiny irrelevant fix, but that's why if you just watched the previous video, you're probably seeing slightly different numbers scroll by than we did before, and that's okay. That's a server-side bug. There's been no client-side change since the last video. Okay, so I want this thing to look like a date. Well, what I do is I bring up the Angular website, and I just happen to know that the tool for doing that is called the date pipe. So I can type in date pipe, and I can pick this here, and so I can look and see how you use a date pipe. So you take a date expression, put the little pipe character, then the word date with optionally a format. Importantly, expression can be a number in milliseconds since the epoch, which I think is January 1, 1970. I guess slightly before the origin of Unix is why that was chosen. And that's one of the formats it'll take, and that is the format of data we have. So I can just take this expression and put the word date after it. So let's see where we get with an initial, very simple move in that direction. So again, this is the client code, and I think that's the pair history view here. So I have that timestamp, and I'm going to put the pipe character and then the date pipe. Now, in some earlier versions of Angular, in alpha and beta, I would have had to go in here and do some work to tell this thing to make that date pipe available, but they changed that, and in the current versions, it's ended up where you don't have to do anything special. It's just immediately available. So the date pipe is built in, you can just use it. Now, I'm on Chrome, and so it works. If you're going to use this date pipe on certain browsers, here we go. It's only reliable out of the box on Chrome and Opera, which is not a very impressive swath of the browser use base out there. But there are some other pages in the docs that'll tell you how to add a polyfill for this internationalization API to get up and running correctly on Internet Explorer and Firefox and like Android mobile and some other things. I'm really hoping that in a future version we no longer have to do those hoops, but for the moment, if you want to use this date pipe and you're not on Chrome, you'll have to work for it a little bit more. Okay, so that worked, but it only showed me the it only showed me just the date part, and that wasn't really very helpful, right? Just seeing these dates go by. I really want to see like the date and time. So to take a look at the syntax, so for example, I can say, it looks like I can say date colon, then I put a value in a string, and we'll do date and medium just to see how that one looks. Okay, so if I do date colon, now what if I tried this? What if I just said date colon medium without the string? Let's see what happens with that. I think we'll be unimpressed by that. Yeah, so it did some kind of strange default when I gave it that. So that did not give me what I wanted here. What it actually did was it looked for a variable called medium on the component, and there was no such variable, and so it took that empty value. So it passed an empty value into date. Make it the quotes makes it a literal string, and now we should see that full lengthy date format. So that's kind of long. That's probably more than I want to show on here. because typically I have in mind this like being a dashboard for today's data. So I happen to know there's a variant called medium time, which gives you just the time in a somewhat medium length format without giving you the whole date. So there's the variation I like. We'll call that good enough and move on. Okay, I think I can. Here, we'll go ahead and commit that, and I'm going to push that to that repository. So use date pipe to format times. And I feel lucky, so hopefully it won't take too long to push that up to the master for everyone else to see. Okay, so that was an easy one. What I've really kind of been hoping for with this application since the beginning is to have some kind of on-screen graphic to show you this data visually as it streams through. I spent a little time researching graph libraries, and there's lots and lots of graph libraries for JavaScript. In our work at Oasis Digital, we've probably used 5 of them in some considerable depth. But what they all have in common is that if I use those, I won't be using much Angular. I'll either be using some Angular adapter around a graph or chart library, or I'll even be, just like writing JavaScript code to call some JavaScript DOM manipulation thing. And I really want to make this live coding with Angular. So what I'm going to try to do, and this could go a little rough, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to use Angular bindings to SVG to get some sort of very rough representation of a graph onto the screen. So we'll see how well it works, and I expect it'll be quite rough to compare to if we used an off-the-shelf graph library, but we're going to try it. Okay, so I think I'm going to call this a pair history. I never sure whether to use graph or chart. I have a feeling the word chart is more technically correct, so even though I keep saying the word graph, I'm going to try to get in the rhythm of saying chart. I think I'm actually making a chart, not a graph. So we're going to call this a pair history chart. Now, I think this will be technically a view component because I don't think it'll be aware of where its data comes from. I think it'll just have data bound into it. I'm not sure if I want to put the word view after it or not, though, so I'm just going to call it a pair history chart for now. Now, this thing generated a few more files than I would have preferred. We're trying to keep things really simple here, so I think I'm going to go ahead and lose the spec. So if in real code, I'd have some spec, but in this live coding exercise, I'm trying to keep it minimal. And then this CSS file, I'm going to be using SVG, and I happen to know from commercial work we've done that the SVG needs to be styled by a global style sheet if you're going to style it. I can use SVG tags in the template, but Angular 2 does not know how to manipulate those tags in the CSS file in a way that makes the CSS apply to those elements. So I happen to know the CSS will not work for what we're going to do, so I'm going to keep things simple by removing it. And then this history chart, I need to not mention the CSS file that doesn't exist. I almost never do an on init, but I guess I'll let that hang out for a minute here. I guess mostly I want to make sure to use this thing. So let's take this app pair history chart. Now, this view component is where I have a panel defined and I'm listing the data. So I think what I'm going to do is just stick it in here. So I'm actually using one display component kind of inside another display component. You can probably find 15 different points of view from different experts on whether that's a good idea. But we'll call that good enough for the moment. Then I know I'm going to want it to display the quotes. So let's tell it that the quotes, we want to pass it some quotes and we want it to be these latest quotes. And then let's go ahead and tell it what the currency pair is, because I know we have a currency pair up here, just in case it needs to display that data somehow. So let's pass it that data. Now, generally speaking, it's not a great idea to have a component like this that's supposed to be displaying a chart be hard-coded to a certain size. So I'm going to be especially enthusiastic here. I'm going to assume that things go swimmingly well in the development and that I actually get far enough that I can tell it how big to be. So height, I'm making up widths and heights here because we can easily edit them later. I'm just saying let's tell it to be that big. Okay, so let's see if that works. I think we'll find it does not work, but I will give it a shot. By the way, I don't think I have that thing, so I'd have to type ng serve, right? And I like to just type npm start and let each application setup know about the details of how to start it. That's why you saw that error go by. Okay, let's try to bring this thing up. Ooh, look at that! I have some errors go by. Quotes is not a known property of my history chart. Well, that makes sense here. So in here, I tried to say what these 4 bindings should be. So I'm going to go ahead and just make those exist. So I don't think I'll need a constructor, so I'll get rid of that. Those here are my 4 things I need to bring in. If you want to make something available for binding, you have to say input. So I happen to know that these are my exact 4 bindings. I'll do just a little bit of cleanup here. The data types here are going to take a little bit of work. Well, the width and height, these are just numbers, so that's easy. I'll make those numbers. And then the pair, that's just what currency pair, and we're just representing that as a string. Let me see, input we need to bring in from up here. And then now these quotes, so what type are those? So I'll say any, because I'd really like to get this program up and compiling and running again before I dig into more extensive programming. Okay, so it came up, and I do see this thing that says pair history chart works. Now, from here, this is going to get pretty experimental. So in keeping with that, I'm going to go ahead and make a commit here. So I'm going to commit this as a, maybe not the word placeholder, as a skeleton chart component. So it doesn't actually do anything yet. You can just push data into it and it ignores it, but it's kind of a skeleton of what a real chart component is going to be. Okay, so I want to actually do some work in here. I want to do something with this data. Now, you have to know a little bit about the Angular 2 component lifecycle at this point, and what I know about it is that this data is going to change. So the height and width might change occasionally, like maybe I'll find a way to wire those up into resizing the window, but the quotes, those are going to change all the time. The pair might or might not change. If you just want to redo the work when just anything changes, that's actually the easiest case for what you can do with all this on stuff. So I'm going to say that, so on changes, I believe is what it's called, and then I want to implement on changes, and there's something called ng on changes. So now I have a place to write code. So this code will be executed after the first time these bindings get populated, and then every time thereafter. So many times this could potentially be executed. Okay, next, now these quotes, what are these? Well, I think I actually know. If I go here, this is the component that it's being used from, and it says that it's an array of fx quote. So I can simply say, this is an array of fx quote. If I want to use a type, I have to import it from somewhere, so I can just bring that import over. Okay. Now, what do I want to do? Let me see here. I have a couple of notes off here to the side about the syntax of SVG, and hopefully that'll be enough to get through this. Okay, so let's go here, or not that one. Let's get up this chart component. Let me see, let's start some kind of heading. I'm gonna make it an H4, so chart for pair. And this will at least let me know that the pair is getting in correctly. Now this is where it gets interesting. This is where I have to consult something to get it right. SVG, this is an HTML element, right? So SVG is something you can say in HTML. But if you want to access any of the SVG specifics, you need to put those in the SVG namespace like this. So an SVG rectangle, if you just say rect, it won't work. You'll get an error. You have to say SVG rect, and I happen to know that for a rect, it's a XY height and width. So X equals something, Y equals something, height equals something, width equals something. Okay, let's keep going here. So for an SVG, you have to tell it also a height and a width. Height equal, and a width equal. And let's tell it that the height, I'm just going to make up a couple numbers here, 200, 100, and I want to make sure this whole thing just works. So let's just put a rectangle in it and then a height of I don't know, I'm just making it up here. I want to get something to appear on the screen. And this is a great thing to do, by the way. So before I even think about how to do angular bindings in here, I just want to make sure I can put the DOM elements in here and have something appear on the screen. So let's see if that worked. Oh, it did not. Okay, so unexpected closing tag SVG. So it got here and said, I didn't expect you to close an SVG. So this is an interesting get. So the Angular 2 HTML parser compiler, it is not aware that SVG Rect is just its own beast. It thinks SVG Rect is a container that it has something inside. It doesn't know that this should be sort of an implied closing tag. So what we have to do is we have to cheat and tell it. So even though HTML does not have this notion right here, nonetheless, if we embed SVG in an Angular 2 HTML template, we have to give it this hint that SVG Rect should be closed. That's a very interesting wrinkle at the edge of Angular. Let's see if that gets us past the error. Oh, look at that. So I got a mark on the screen. So that's good. So I can get, and obviously my data flow is not affected, but I can get some data on the, some kind of mark to appear. Okay, so what's next? Well, I don't like how I have a height specified here, but I just said that this overall component has a width and height passed into it. So let's try that. Oops, I guess I should have thought about that just slightly more, but so I wonder if this will work. Let's see. I happen to know this won't work, but we'll give it a try and see what error comes up. Okay, so if you get an error that says can't bind to height because it's not a known property. So this is another interesting edge case of how Angular templating works. So what I just wrote is actually equivalent to writing this. Right, so I could make this transformation. So Angular 2 is making this transformation internally. It's just another syntax of the same thing. And you'll see it should fail with the same error. Height is not a known property. So this is an interesting edge case. Most of the stuff we manipulate on the DOM using Angular or React, whatever, are what we call DOM properties. But for, I don't know, historical reasons, maybe for no reasons at all, SVG elements don't have properties you can manipulate. They only have attributes you can manipulate. Now, it's unclear why there's a difference, but I happen to know that Angular 2 has this great built-in capability. If I say attr dot, this is a way of saying don't try to manipulate the quality, or don't try to manipulate the property, just manipulate the attribute. So sure enough, that got us past the error, no more errors. So I think that means that whenever I want to manipulate these, I will have to do the same thing. Okay, next. Well, what I'd really like to do is have some sort of, let me see if I can click over here, have some sort of box appear here that's going to be the outline of my chart. And since that's arguably the easiest thing to get right, I'm going to try to get that right first before I start trying to put data on the chart. So inside the SVG, actually this could be a rect, that's fine. Let me see here. You can say things like stroke width. I have just a couple notes here on the coloring I can do. Okay, so I can give this a few hints. I could say style, and I could say fill none. That's one of the options of how you style things. And I could say stroke, and this will be the color, right? And you can use all kinds of different colors here. I'm going to use aquamarine because that one seems like it's handy in front of me. So now I should have an empty box with a light colored line around it. And in fact, I do. Great. Okay. Now, the data we have to work with is just a width and a height. So the obvious thing to do would be to tell this thing to put it up at the top and then put in the width. It's kind of funny. I've done that twice in a row. That's how you know it's not staged, it's real. It's making mistakes live in real time on video. Okay, now this is the thing I just tried a minute ago. I think it will also fail here. I think all of the SVG settings all have to be done as attributes. Let's see, can't bind to height because it isn't a known property. Okay, so I have to use the different syntax. I need to do this thing where I prepend with attr, like that. And then I need to close these. And since these are bracket bindings, I do not use the curly brace syntax on the right. So let's see if this draws me something. Okay, that seemed to work. But there's something I want to do a little bit different here, and that is I want this to be the box that represents the data, right? So I want like the leftmost point here and the rightmost point here. And I happen to know that if I draw, for example, a circle along the 0 line, that circle will get cut off on the left and get cut off on the right over here. So having implemented SVG drawing before, I know that what I really want to be able to do is say I want just a little bit of margin. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make up a variable. So margin, I think I can just say equal, because then it'll know it's a number. We'll say 8 pixels. So I want there to be 8 pixels of margin. Now because I made this a property, it's available here. So what I really want is X to be margin and Y to be margin. But if that's the case, then I need to do this bit again. So common theme here, you kind of see it go on and on. Let me try to wrap this. Someone pointed out one of my last videos. I haven't got many YouTube comments, but I mean a lot of offline comments. Here we go, a little bit bigger text for people who are forced to watch all this on a small screen. Okay, so this thing is gonna start however many pixels in from the upper left, and I really want it to stop that many from the right. So I want to do height minus margin, except that would still only leave margin on the top, and I really want to leave margin on the bottom too, but that's getting a little long. So how about that? Minus 2 times margin, and this thing is sort of even all the way around, so that means I have to do the same thing here. So let's see if that gets me just a box that is kind of, here we go, it's in a little bit. And see how the line's actually a little thicker? I don't know if that's coming through in the video, but the line is thicker. That's because in the first attempt, it had been pushed so far to the outside edges that it was actually getting cut off by the edges of the whole SVG element that it was in. So this is a much better way to kind of draw a line, is to get in here and explicitly decide to leave a bit of margin. Okay, other ideas, what to do next here. So what about this data coming in, right? So we have this data coming in. I wonder if I could use that data to draw. So I have some data available here, quotes. Okay, so I could imagine going in here and saying I want a loop. Now, how does one loop? Well, one loops with an ng4. So let's say that I wanted to do another, let's do an SVG, circles are always nice. Let's do an SVG circle, and here's what I have to consult. I have an SVG cheat sheet up over here, by the way. So there's a CX and a CY and an R. So CX, CY, and R. So that's what I had in my cheat sheet. By the way, if you Google for SVG cheat sheet, you'll find lots and lots of them to choose from that remind you of all these settings. Okay, so I'm going to want to bind to that. I'm just going to go ahead and guess in advance that that's going to be an attribute when I bind to it. And then I'm sure I'm going to want to be able to bind to CY the same way. So Y is going to be where to put it this way, and X is where to put it this way. And then R is radius, and I don't know why they didn't just name it radius, but I don't know if I'm going to have to adjust that, so I'm just going to say that's going to be 6. Just guessing a number, we'll see how it looks. And then again, this is really kind of the SVG equivalent of a void element, but you have to tell Angular that it's okay that it's void. Okay, so I could try to draw more than one circle here. So let me see here. ng4 equal let let me see, what do we call this? This is called quotes, queue of quotes. And then for the Y, we'll put it at about 50. And what I'd love to do is just somehow use this data that's come in. So let's go see what the data looks like. Oops. So maybe make this bid number or something and use it. I probably want to use bid for the Y up and down, but what if I just took that bid, because I can see it's, I'm going to ignore the fact that this one is different and say I can see that's in the 1.6 range. So what if I just tried multiplying this thing by, man, let me see here, 617. See, it's changing over a pretty small range. So what if I took that thing and I subtracted 1.6, and that would give me this kind of number, then I multiply by 1,000. Let's try that. I just want to get something to appear on screen that's data driven. So Q point bid minus 1.6, and you can use parentheses here for an expression, times 1,000. So let's see if I can get that to run without error, and just see if I can get some data. Okay, so I am getting some, see how it's getting a little wider there? I guess I need to maybe blow it up by another order of magnitude. We'll try that. I just want to make sure it's really data driven. Yeah, okay. Maybe I really need to, so this is getting really awkward to try to guess what these multipliers should be. And whatever I do for this one is not going to work for this guy over here because the numbers are in a different range. Ooh. Oh, I guess I should have said 1.59 because sometimes they are a little bit less. So 1.59 and maybe not multiplied quite so aggressively. I'm just trying to get some more spread of data to appear here, just so I convince myself that my data-driven binding on my SVG is working. Yeah, okay, so it's working. So the basic idea works. But now this is where having some experience comes in handy. I have been down this road before, trying to take domain data and write really complex stuff in here in the bindings to try to figure out how to get it to appear on the screen, and it ends up really, really awful. What I found is much better is to process the data in the component and make some different variable that you can use in the bindings here that is already kind of closer to the shape you want. So let me see here. I think almost every time I do this, I end up defining an interface that has like an X and a Y. I'm going to call it point this time. Sometimes I call it coordinates. So it comes in really handy to have that kind of a type available. Now, I think what I'd like to do here is I'd like to make some points. So if I called it coordinate, I would have called it coordinates, I guess. So here, I want to have like an array of points of some kind here. And now this ng on changes, this is going to get executed whenever any of these change. So right in here, I could take the data in these quotes and I could process them to make points. So I could say something like this dot points equal this dot quotes, because it will have just changed. And then I can use the map function. It's a built-in array function. And I'll say quote, and now here I need to return a pipe, or I need to return a point. Okay. Let me see here. So to make that point, this gets a little bit interesting. I'd like to say something like, X colon something, Y colon something, but there's a syntactic problem here in that this now appears to be a code block. And here's just a little trick and tip for TypeScript. If you put a set of parentheses there, now the thing inside is obviously an expression, not a code block, and now I have a valid line of code. Now, these numbers aren't right, but I could start by taking this computation, just for the moment, because I need to really think about this more, and I could put this in here. So the X is going to be this value. So X will be that. Okay. And then Q, why would it say that it's not, oh, it's not a bid? Oh, because these are coming in as strings. And in this Angular expression, a string is automatically getting parsed as a number when it needs to be. So now that I'm out here in JavaScript or TypeScript, I need to explicitly tell it to do that. Okay, so not great, but we're getting up and running. Here's another tip. I can do that. I can format the code. And now it's going to be a little easier to understand the shape of what's going on. So I've just taken the same idea and I put it in there. And now I have this thing called points, which is available for binding. So rather than Q of quotes, I'm going to do P of points. And this is now simply p.x. So now I should be able to get very similar results to what I got before. Ooh, expected length, not a number. That's weird. It expected a length and it got not a number. Okay. So when I see this, I want to know what's going on here. So what I'll do is, when in doubt, so log, what do my points? This is kind of good old-fashioned print statement debugging. Those of us who kind of learned to program in the era of print statement debugging tend to go back to it more often than we should. Okay, so these are coming out and they have a bunch of objects. Oh, not a number. But oh, it's an array of 10. I see. So what's happening is these ones at the beginning. In a previous coding exercise, I put these empty placeholders at the beginning because I thought it looked better. And I probably should go back and revisit that decision. But I'm going to pretend maybe somebody else made that decision and it's hard to revisit. I think I'll just add some code here locally to filter those out. So .filter, another built-in function of arrays in JavaScript or ES6, ES7, TypeScript, whatever. So Q dot, so there's that timestamp, that's a number. If that's greater than 0, then clearly we're populated with real data. So now I'm only going to get points that making it through this process that had a timestamp. So that should mean I don't get the ones at the top anymore. Maybe I won't get these expected attribute errors anymore. Let me see here. I want to see some marks appear before I get much farther. Oh, there we go. I don't know why it was longer before one appeared. I guess there's randomness is why. Oh, but I'm not seeing my data. Okay. Let's see what's going on here. X317. Oh, maybe my data, maybe my numbers got a little bigger. That's probably what happened. Because this is random data coming in, so maybe they just went out of range. So we'll just reduce our multiplier, make it a little easier to see the data. So maybe this, I just want to, okay, I just make sure that everything's still working because I'm seeing something appear. Okay, so now these are my quotes that are filtered. So let me think about this. Now I have these bids. What I'd really like to do is, I'd like the bids to be the Y value instead. So I'm just going to go ahead and move them there so I don't forget. But what I really want to do is I want to programmatically figure out what the range of bids should be. So I want to make the chart automatically set its top and bottom value. So I want to be able to write some line of code here that says something like const min bid equal something. So mid bid, I want it to be math.min of something. So I need to somehow get an array in there. We'll cross that bridge in a minute. So I really need, if I could get an array of the bids, and I could somehow get the minimum from that array, that would help me out. So I think what I'll do first is I'll make up another const. So const, I'm going to call these quotes. Should I say const quotes? Let me think about this. Is it okay to, I guess it's okay to shade the name this dot quote. So const quotes, and that's going to equal that guy. So let's do that, and now I can put the word quotes here, kind of reformat everything. So now I have quotes, which are just all the incoming quotes, but with the fake ones filtered out. And then in this next line, I'm still doing this thing to process my points. So in fact, you know what? I'm going to need to know this min bid before I make my points, because it's going to play into it. So I'll put that up there. Now I need to get the bids out. So let's just say, this is where having worked with the APIs a lot comes in handy. So to get the bids out, I'll do quotes. So each quote is an object that has a bid and some other fields. So I'll say quotes.map because I want to translate them. And then I want to say quote.bid. So this would get the bids out. So now I'd have an array of the bids. And I know the types because I know what map does and so on, but I obviously could have said that this was an array of numbers, except that it's apparently not an array of numbers. Oh, because you have a bid. Okay, so this parse float, I need to do this parse float thing up in here. and that will make it be a number, and now this will be valid. Great. Okay, so to get the minimum bid, I'd like to say bids in there, except that math min, just like, you type like numbers in there, right? Well, this is another, I know what to do here. This is a really great operator called the spread operator. It's 3 dots together. That says take an array and pretend that that was a whole bunch of arguments to the function that I'm calling. So now min bid should actually be right, and then I think I'm going to need to know a max bid also, and that can be done in almost exactly the same way. And these should be a pretty good min bid and max bid. Now I don't know if that's really right, and I need to do some math down here with that, but I kind of want to get a little more data. I want to kind of get like an X and a Y thing going before I go real far with it. So let's just see if it worked by printing out something else instead. So min bid, max bid. So what I should see in my printout at the bottom are some numbers, and they should roughly correspond to kind of either the number range of these or the number range of those. They started out at these infinities, and that's fine. And now it looks like, yeah, so my bids, my min and max are in the 85 range. That must be for this one, and then in the 1 point something range for this one. So that idea seemed to work. I seem to be able to get the min and max bids. Now I think I want to do the same thing left and right. So I want to kind of place things in my rectangle left to right based on the time. And I don't want to like pre-wire it or configure it for the time. So I want to go ahead and figure out based on that actual incoming data. So I think I can now do almost exactly the same thing. And I don't like copying code, but if it saves me time. Okay, so timestamps, and that's also going to be a set of numbers, and that I'm just going to grab the timestamp, and that one already is a number, so that looks like it's valid the first time. And then let me see here. I want to do the same thing with timestamps, so let's I really don't like this duplication, but in the short time I'm spending in this live coding here today, I don't have time to go research how to make this duplication go away. I think there is a way to do it. I think there's a way using one of these, not Lodash, it has kind of a chaining style, but like Ramda or like the Lodash FP variation, or the transducer implementations for JavaScript. I think if I grabbed one of those, there'd be a way of kind of expressing this flow of data and then applying the same flow of data to different fields without duplicating the logic, which is what I've done here. But again, that's way out of scope. I'm trying to keep things much simpler for today. Okay, so now that I know what's going on here, I think I need to know the difference between these. Because what I'm going to do, so for example with the X, what I want to be able to write for X is I want to be able to write something like q.timestamp, and I want to like subtract the minimum timestamp. By the way, this is where it comes in handy to have spent a lot of time writing kind of pixel level logic on past applications. But so I want to kind of take the current timestamp, subtract the smallest one, and then multiply that by like the range of the timestamps, which is like the max minus the min. So I think my math will be simpler if I make like some kind of range there. So range for my timestamps. So the range for my timestamps is going to equal, I guess, just the max minus the min. Max minus the min. And I've done things similar to this before. I know that when you just have one, these values are going to be the same, and they're going to be 0, and that you often end up dividing by these numbers, dividing by these ranges. So having this be 0 is bad. So if I see some errors, I might have to put an if somewhere to make that not be 0. So okay, so let me see here. So if I took this thing, so I took how far I am from the baseline, and then I divided that by the range, that would give me like between 0 and 1 of how far I should be across the graph. And then if I just multiply this by like the width or something, this should be pretty close. So let's see what happens. So I should be back to spreading these across. So again, Yeah, so I have something all the way there. Oh, I see. See how it's all the way at the left and all the way at the right? I didn't take into account the margin. So I need to add the margin here. Oh, and this width here actually needs to be, wow. This width has to be minus the margins. Otherwise, it's going to end up pushing some data all the way off the right edge here. So I need to do a little bit more calculation to get my data spread left and right. And look, I am getting these expected length, not a number. I wonder if that's that divide by 0 problem. I think it is. Okay. So what can I do here? What I'd like to do, I guess, is maybe try to find a way to get some of this math to happen up here. If I look at this, like this width, see how I'm multiplying here? If I could rearrange the math so I did more of the computation up here outside the loop, that would both make it slightly more efficient and a lot easier to look at. So let's write it this way. So let's say that the x is always going to be the margin plus how far we are from the minimum times something. So I'm going to try to move the rest of this math up out here. So what if I did multiplication here instead? I could accommodate that by inverting what I have up here. And I'm not sure if the word range is right anymore. But see how now I'm multiplying by width every time? I could multiply by width up here. Oh, but look. Yeah, now I can just put that over here, not do that silly 1 over. Okay. Okay, so that's pretty good. So I think I'm going to call that like the scale of the timestamps. I think that might be a more correct name. So we'll call that the scale of the timestamps. And then I can see right here the divide by 0 is about to happen. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a math max in front of this. And with that math max, now I can say, well, just in case that was 0, I always want my scale to be, say, I don't know, 1 or something. I have to think a while what this value should be, but at least now I'm preventing the error that I would get if it was a divide by 0, right? Okay, so now let's see if I get my data spread across a bit more. Is it spread across? I need more data to arrive. Yes, it is still spread across, but I think, see how there's none on the very right? I think there should be one on the right. I think what's happening is that I'm multiplying this width. I need to subtract off this dot width minus 2 margins again. I think that math that I had previously is still correct. Okay, try to get this thing a little bit easier to read. Shouldn't need to log anymore. Okay, so it looks to me like I need to do the same kind of scaling the other way. So now that, because I'm handling X and Y kind of the same way here, I want to scale the bids, and now I can just change this to be the height, GHT, and then this will be max bid, this will be min bid. And I seem to remember that my bids are over a very, very small range. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to use some kind of really small multiplier there just to try to make sure that I don't screw up my math. Because again, I just want to make sure that's not a 0, because I don't want to get errors when I try to divide by 0. So now y will be, I guess I still have to parse float this thing. And so I need to say this dot margin, because I'm using the same margin both ways. And then I need to subtract this from the min bid instead of just that hard-coded value, and then multiply by my scale bids. Okay, so I've attempted to just do the same logic each way, and what I'd like to see is data going up and down here. Oh, I know what I did. I didn't actually wire this up to say p.y. Okay. And I think it would look better if these things were just a little bit smaller. So let's give this a chance to redraw and see how it looks. Okay, what exactly is happening here? Oh, yeah, see how the numbers are slightly moving to the left as new ones arrive? It's more obvious here because more data has arrived. That each new point is always on the right, and that makes sense because each new write is always going to be the newest rightmost timestamp because the data is always generated in ascending timestamp order. So this thing basically looks like it worked. I want to commit this, and then I want to play with the speed that it runs at, and then I want to try to connect the dots. So when you have something basically working, it's always good to commit. So super rough chart. Okay. Now I'd like to see this data flow faster. And if I remember one of these components, when we talked to this back end, yeah, we said to grab the low frequency data, and I happen to remember that there's another endpoint that gets you high frequency data. So let's see if this makes it scroll. Okay, so something good is happening here. I want to try drawing lines to connect the dots, and then if that works, we will call that good enough for this. We're getting long here. We're at 45 minutes, so we will give it a try. By the way, my machine's still just using a little bit of CPU for this, so I'm not going to worry about leaving this running while I code. It should be fine. Okay, so I want to try to connect the dots. Well, to connect the dots, let me see here. I have a cheat sheet off to the side here again, where I have my my SVG things. There's an SVG line that I could use, so I could say I want to make some SVG lines. Now there's a thing called polyline, but polyline is really ugly to use because you have to pass its series of points inside a string, and you can't use ng4 for that, and that might be good in some cases, but I don't want to try to use that here. So the way this works is you say x1 equals something, x1 y1 x2 y2. So I'll just go straight to typing it more like I know it needs to be typed. It's got to be attr.x1 is going to have to equal something. Okay, and I know I'll need several more variations of this. So y1 x2 y2, so that's just some basic SVG. And then let me see here, it takes the same thing, or actually here's a different way to do it. You can say stroke width. If I just want to say make this thing like a narrow line, only a 1 pixel line, and then you can say stroke, and then you can set things like colors here. So I think gray might be a valid color, and we'll put in this pretend closing marker. Okay, now I don't want to auto format this because it'll stack all these up on the same line, and I think that'll make it harder to work with, harder to look at this thing. Okay, so before I try to program it, I want to just see the line appear. Yep, so sure enough, so I know how to make a line. That's just some basic SVG. And by the way, I'd like to point out, there's no D3, there's no graph library. This is just SVG that's built into all the browsers, and Angular templating that can template SVG just like HTML. So I'm doing graphics, and I'm not digging into anything third party. I'm just leveraging what's in the box with Angular. Okay, so I need to give this thing has got to have an ng4. And we'll say let s, we're going to call these segments, I guess, because they're line segments. I was going to like L of lines, but L looks a lot like 1. So let's do S of segments. And so we're going to have to do something with S in here, and like S point X or something. Let's figure out what the data, we'll figure out how to make the data look first, and then I'll figure out exactly what to type in here. Okay, so I want to say this dot segments. Okay, so for segments need to be based on pairs of these points. Okay, so let me see here. So what if I said, well, I'd like to actually, if I said this dot points dot map, then I can write some function in here, and whatever I write in here will end up giving me a segment for each point. But that's too many. I actually don't want a segment for each point. I want a segment for most of the points, but not the first, either not the first point or not the last point. So I happen to know that it's easier to slice off the first element of an array. And if you have one of these, let me see here. I'm starting to see some CPU usage on my machine, and I don't want to investigate why that is right now. So I think what I'll do is, in the interest of keeping the usage low, I will set that back to low frequency and let this reload. Actually, I think I have some bugs in, so I don't think it'll even run. But that should tame the usage on my computer. Okay, so where was I? I happen to know that it's very easy to cut off the beginning of an array, and it's harder to cut off the end of an array. So let's say this, that points at slice 1. That just means give me an array that has everything starting with the 1th element, but we're 0 base, so the 1th element is actually the 2nd element. So now I'm saying, take the points I just made, cut off the first one, and run them through this function to give me the segments. So this will be a point, and then I want to have some kind of object that I get out of that. So let's see, I need to have segments. There's a lot of ways to do this. I could just do an any if I wanted it to be untyped. How about, here's a simple way, because I want to have pairs of points. I could make an object, but I think this might be even easier. What if I just said an array of points? So it's an array of arrays of points. And so each array of points is going to be a pair. So it's going to be an array that's some number long times only 2 wide. Okay, so that means that the thing in here has to return an array of points. So that's a point and that's a point. So this, I think, so this would satisfy typing. This says take all the points that I got from the above, cut off the first one, and then convert that to a pair of itself. But I really don't want a pair of the same point. I want like each pair of points. So this is the ending point. I want this to be a different point. So let's just say this dot points. I need an index to put in there. Okay, well I happen to know that if I say p comma index, then this will be the index. So I got a reason about this. So point number 1 is going to become the 0th thing to go through here. So when this says 0, it means that I'm working on the 1th point. And so if this is the 1th point, I want to get the 0th point. So I think that might be enough to work. It looks absurdly simple, but this might be enough. This might be enough to give me a pair of arrays of points for my segment. So I don't really trust that it will be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out that, and then kind of use our usual tip, usual trick, just see what those segments look like. So let's see if this looks like data somewhat close. Oh, here we go. Okay. So it's a little bit hard to read, but it's an array containing an array, and then that array is 1, 2 elements. I think it worked. I think that this thing is an array of arrays of 2 points. Yep, I think that actually worked. So to use it, I'll have to uncomment this. So that means that this is going to be an array of 2 points. So it'll be s0.x, s0.y, and then s1.x and s1.y. So I feel lucky. Let's see if this draws lines in the right places. Oh, oh yeah, look at that. Look at that, I have lines. Okay, so I have a moving scrolling graph. It's very ugly, it's unlabeled, none of my axes are labeled, so there's lots of work to do in future live coding, but I have a working scrolling graph, and you can see it there at a low speed or with a little bit of hackery, and I won't check it in this way. You can see it this way at a high speed. Now I'll have to investigate later whether this high speed, whether this builds up CPU usage over time, because I'm unsure. I haven't spent any time with that. We're not doing any performance optimizations yet, right? So this is the kind of the least we could possibly do here. But so for example, there's a mechanism that's similar to the old track by in Angular 1. There's a way of saying what to track by in Angular 2. So when I do these ng4s, there's a way of telling it to kind of reuse the existing elements better instead of making all new ones each time it processes this. But I don't know, I'm pretty happy with this. I didn't use any libraries. And I got some kind of a scrolling graph up and running. So I think I'm going to call that successful for today. And as always, I'll end with this note. This was Angular Live Coding. I'm Kyle Cordes at Oasis Digital. We write big, fancy, complicated, rich web clients. Please come work for us. If you want to learn how to do it, go to Angular Bootcamp and sign up. We teach individuals, we teach teams. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. See you on the next one.